It makes sense to be machmir for Rabbeinu Tam. Does it make sense to use Rabbeinu Tam as a leniency? What does Rabbeinu Tam even mean? A lot of details. We're going to fight about. We're going to try to argue and get to some of the bottom lines, if we could. I'm giving out these outlines so you can follow along, take notes, you can see what we're doing. Now we're going to start. He's the moderator. Here's the one, and you can ask questions as we're going to add more. Yeah, can you pass this to the back around? All right, awesome. All right, ready?
Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Hoffman, for coming again.
Thank you for having me. And despite the fact that Rabbi Solt and I are probably going to be yelling at each other in a few minutes, we are very good friends. So that's the main thing. We can have risk the rice. At least how do I talk? We're still good friends.
Okay. So the first question is, how long is a meal in halakha?
Do you want to go first?
A meal. So there are three shitot. One is the shita, the Rambam, the meal is 24 minutes. One is the shita of the Trumat Hadeshen, and others that a meal is 18 minutes, and most Rishonim hold that it's 22 and a half minutes. There are difficulties with all these different opinions, and some want to say that actually if you time how long it takes to walk a mill, it's actually a little bit shorter, more like 15 minutes. So again, but as we're going to find out later, we're going to see, to me, the exact time that it takes to walk a mill is not particularly significant in terms of halakha the ma'asel, though Rabbi Sultan will disagree.
I think the mill is very important because, why do I think so? The Gemara uses it as a term of time. It's really a measure of distance, but we use it to figure out how long it takes a person to walk. And it was hard for people to measure something on a clock, on a watch. They gave people a mill as a way of making it easier for people to measure things. There's a parish, so therefore, let's say in the Gemara in Psachim, which it talks about 4 mil. We'll talk about what in that world that means, but that's something to do with Rabbeinu Tam's opinion. So the Gemara calls that 4 mil. That's what Chazal are trying to give us an easy, handy way to measure things. That's found in many Rishonim, the number of mil, and it's found in Shulchan Aruch in one place, not all the places. So that means to me, that's a guidepost, how you should follow halakha based on whatever the mill is. So in the Gemara and Shabbat, the Gemara equates whatever it says in terms of the sky getting red and dark in terms of mil. So therefore, to me, that's a guidepost. We go with 3/4 of mil or 4 mil. Now, what is a mil? Yes, the dominant shita in the Sardish Achronim is 18 minutes. That is based on the Chida, the Ben Ish Chai, Chamavadia, based on Shulchan Aruch, based on Trumat Hadeshen. The problem is, logically, it's the most problematic one. It really doesn't seem to correspond to the Gemara at all. But Cham David has a long contrast. He comes with several answers for it, none of which are very convincing. I haven't found any great answer for the 18-minute mill, but I still think Ikar Hadin could be followed 18-minute mill. But whenever we're talking about Daraitas, I always would follow a longer mill. The 22.5-minute mill I think makes more sense. So to use that for Qumrah. But an important thing I do think mill is very important for basic halakha. That's why the number is used throughout the poskim. One proof to this is my theory is the Perish Kanmon of the Rambam. The Perish Kanmon, Perish Kanmon of the 1300s, commentary from Mitzrayim on the Rambam. It's Egyptian. Guys, come join their seats over here. So he writes, why did the rabbis say the amount of time it takes to walk a mill? But the Rambam leaves it out. The Rambam doesn't even tell you how dark the sky is. The Rambam only writes stars. He leaves out most of the things in the Gemara. And you know why? Because the Rambam is telling you the Ikar Hadin. The basic rule is the stars. That's what it says, and always, the stars coming in. But people are going to get confused, so rabbis made it easier for us, and the Gemara gave us a lot of other signs. Included in that is the mill, in his list. So my Perush Kadmon is the 1300. He's probably a Talmud of Rav Avram ben Rambam. 1300 in the school to think of the Rambam, the commentary on Rambam. He writes something like that. The mill is seemingly binding for him. It's not actually, we base everything based on the mill, but it's a good sign about what the stars are actually in place. That's my thought about the mill. Any response or any questions on this? Okay, so keep moving.
The next question is, how do you apply the Zemanim from Eretz Yisrael to anywhere else in the world?
the Gemara was talking about the location, obviously, of Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, which are not exactly the same, but are similar enough that you could use basically the same figures in Eretz Yisrael and Bavel. It really goes by the latitude, how far north it is. The longitude doesn't really make a difference, but it goes by north and south in terms of how long it takes between when the sun sets and when you can see stars. So it gives a shear of 3/4 of a mil, which is an approximation for what time of year. Different discussion. But the way you do it is essentially that this figure of 3/4 of a mil is not talking about, or whatever shear you want to use, 4 mil, whatever it is. It's not talking about. It's not talking about all over the world. It's obviously does not make any sense if you go to Oslo, which is extremely far north, farther north than even most Jewish communities like in Lithuania live, which are very far north. So it takes a long time in the summer to get, all the seasons, it takes longer than Eretz Yisrael to get dark. So obviously you can't say that it's Laila 3/4 of a mil after sunset, even according to Rabbi Sultan in Oslo. It's completely light then, you cannot see any stars, nothing, maybe not even one star. So obviously the Shir is talking about Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, and we have to figure out a way to determine the Shir in other locations. And the real way that you determine the Shir in other locations is by looking at the sky. You figure out when 3 stars come out, you figure out when the astronomical events happen, and that's it. The Shirim simply cannot really be applied to other places. But nowadays we have something called light pollution, which is if you go to Times Square, not that I recommend that, but if you go to Times Square, so it's extremely light. If you look up at the sky, you won't see any stars because there's so much light around. You cannot see any celestial bodies. The light doesn't impact. It's like during the day, you can't see the stars because the sun's light overwhelms them. So if you go to some place that's really light and you look up, so the artificial light overwhelms the starlight, you cannot see the stars. So here in Washington Heights, it's not quite as bright, so you could see a few stars. But it's not even the same as if you go out to the mountains or something, then you would see a whole sky full of stars. So you have light pollution. So we cannot see anymore the stars exactly when they come out, or many of the stars exactly when they come out. So therefore, it's more convenient for people nowadays to look at a clock, even though Chazal obviously did not have that in mind. They had in mind that you should look at the sky. So we came up with something called degrees below the horizon, which is already alluded to in the Rishonim. Because they say it's different with the shear between Eretz Yisrael and the equator, which it is. So basically, you take how far the sun is below the horizon. Remember, the sun is traveling around the earth. Not literally, that's how it goes, but just visually, you can perceive it that way. That the sun is traveling around the earth. So the sun sets, and then this is the sun when it sets on the horizon, and then it goes down. So you take the horizon, and you take the location of the sun. You have a certain number of degrees, an angle of where the sun is. So the more degrees below the horizon the sun is, the darker it is. So the way you can, just using a clock to figure out how dark it is compared to Eretz Yisrael in the spring and fall, which is when the Vilna Gaon assumes, not everybody agrees, but the Vilna Gaon assumes that that's when the shear of the Gemara of 3/4 of a mil is talking about. So you take the 3/4 of a mil after sunset in Eretz Yisrael, and you figure out how many degrees below the horizon the sun is. That's an approximation of how dark it is. And then you could use that same degrees for any location in the world and figure it out. Again, the degrees is not a be-all and end-all. It's not that the real halachic shiur is measured in degrees. Degrees is just an approximation of when you would be able to see the stars if there were no light pollution and if you find it more convenient to use a clock. But the degrees is not an absolute halachic measurement. It's just a convenient tool.
Yes, exactly. And I have to say, in my heart, it makes a lot of sense. We should go by degrees. It's just measuring the same things we're measuring in Israel. However, I'm not sure that's the halacha ikar hadin. Maybe we should really follow, and I think there's a good basis for this, to follow Zman Yod, even though it's counterintuitive, counter-science, but the following reasons. One reason is, in the Gemara, there's no evidence that they used degrees to approximate when the stars were coming out. They gave us a shear of mil. They gave us a shear in time of how long it takes to walk. That seems to be the same distance it takes to walk in America. It's the same distance it takes to walk in Israel. So maybe they meant fixed minutes. That shita was considered and pondered, but most Achronim don't like that approach. They said Surah seems to change a little bit. So the Mincha Kohen made it famous. The Perush of the Rambam on the first in the beginning of Brachot, he says the hours of the mill go by. He had Zmaniyot in his Girsa, so that became a very popular approach by the Sardi Achronim. From Ovadia, when he writes in the introduction Hakdama to Dr. Leo Levy's book where he talks about degrees, he disagreed. He said, none of the Achronim, nobody talked about degrees. Look in the Mincha Kohen, he said Zmaniot. And we should go by that. Now, another proof. Now, Chacham Ovadia, I believe, really held like that, even in America. David Yosef has a long conversation, Orchel Maran Chelik Bet. He talks about the end of Shabbat, and he says, my father said, anybody who holds between 13 and a half minutes and 72 minutes makes no sense. The Ben Shlai came with 27 minutes, it's made up. Anybody says degrees, the whole thing is out of a whole cloth. It doesn't exist. He looked in the Rishonim. Chacham Ovadia knew 30 Rishonim on this topic. He knew the Sugya very well. And Chacham Ovadia wrote Chuvot. He wrote two big Chuvot, Chelik Bet and Chelik Zayin, in Yevei Omer. And he says nobody really talked about ma'alot, degrees. It doesn't really exist. The real thing is maniot. How do I know? Because Rabbi Yehuda Ayash in Sadi Aleph, Rabbi Mecha Kohen, the Mishnah Berurah, he understood, many understood, we go as maniot, not ma'alot. Even though the Mishnah Berurah is very confusing. I'm not going to say it's simple at all. That's what Chacham really held. And I was about to write an article about this because, whatever. And then somebody, Rabbi Mordechai Lebhar, Moroccan from LA, he wrote a piece on this topic that all started me to follow degrees, me to follow 40, 50 minutes in America. So I was going to write, I don't think so, the Ikar had in. So I spoke to him on the phone, he was very angry with me. He said, do you see 3 stars in Brooklyn after 20 minutes? So I said, no, but it's getting darker. How do you know? Without the light pollution. So I said, even if you go on the top of the mountaintops, do you think you're going to see the stars? I'm not trying to see the stars. But if I would be a big expert, maybe I could see some stars. Okay? Or maybe Chazal don't care about stars. It's much harder. This is hard. Maybe the Ikar is the mill, and it depends on what was going on in Israel in the times of Chazal. Once we fix the time, the Chazal said treifot, what is kosher, what's not, based on what they saw on their science, so to speak, whatever they saw. And that's Koveya forever. Now that's not just based on bad science, based on Allah Moshe V'Tzinai. Whatever's Koveya stays that way. The same thing the men here in Halakha. Chacham Ovadia is Tshuva on DNA. We don't accept DNA for Mamzerut. If it's the father and the son don't line up the DNA, we match the son with somebody else because none of the poskim talked about DNA. So it's not a halachic measure, it's not a siman, it doesn't count. So this is what I wanted to say to Rabbi Levar, and he told me, you know what, you're not by yourself. I'm trying to remember the name, but a big Talmud of Chacham Ovadia, one of the students from Ovadia, and he came to LA, and he asked him this question, when is Shabbat over? And he told him Chacham Ovadia held, even in America, even in LA, you do 13 and a half minutes by Zmaniot. So he said, he didn't think he's right. He's the one who put out, I don't remember his name anymore, he's the one who wrote the Or L'Tzion, all the posthumous volumes, Talmud of Chacham Ovadia and Or L'Tzion. Yitzchak Yosef writes, whatever says about this, I forget his name now. Oh, Rav Gidon ben Moshe. He's a big student of, so he said this approach Chacham Ovadia really held by Zmanot even in America, which it says in my understanding in the Alpi Yosef, in Chacham David. However, Chacham David later on changed his mind, said, no, even though my father said that, it makes no sense, we should go with degrees. But okay, with all due respect, I listened, Ein halacha ketal makom rav, we should go by the rabbi, the Chacham Ovadia. So I think that's Ikar Adin for a fast down in Durabanan. I'm certainly comfortable to say, even in Brooklyn, you could break the fast after 13 and a half minutes maniot. Okay, so it comes at 15 minutes, it's getting a little bit dark. Anyways, it's only Durbanan. For Deraita, I'd be very nervous to do it. I would probably say to wait extra minutes. I think that is a possible thing. Let me say one better, maybe 2 more proofs quickly. The Uraim, when he measures the mill, he does it. He's talking about in Germany. He's talking about in Germany, if I'm not mistaken, in France, North France.
Keeps going back and forth between France and Germany.
Okay, fine. So the Uraim writes
from
Metz. He's talking about using a sand timer, how to measure the mill. He says nothing about Zmanio, nothing about degrees. So you see, even fixed minutes is not incredible shita, not impossible shita. My other proof is, what did Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana, do if he was living in, Rabbi Yossi lived in Sipori? What did they do in the north of Israel or in Syria, where the Jews were there 2,000 years ago, compared to there in Shalim? It's a few degrees off. They didn't go by degrees. Trigonometry wasn't, so to speak, known by the Jewish people. Nobody knew how to measure degrees below the horizon. So my understanding is they went with Zmaniyot, or they went with fixed minutes. The Rav Chaim Falaji, he writes, Al Pi Kabbalah, with 6 minutes, gigantic chidush. Okay.
Don't you think that the rabbis in the Gemara were just giving their opinion based off of the resources that they had? If you were to tell them in 2,000 years from now, you'll be able to calculate the exact time based off of whatever. You don't even have to explain to them, but we'll know the exact time that disagrees with your opinion. They would say, of course you should do that opinion. That's the exact time. That's meaning
So in order
they
to,
know, like, just we have more resources available. So, like, they would obviously say,
I'm not going to address your question directly, but I want to address something Rabbi Sultan said, which I think will address your, will answer your question. If it doesn't, feel free to follow up. Is I tried to bavorn Rabbi Sultan's explanation with the end of what I said before. Everybody agrees Chazal did not use degrees. Nobody used degrees until recently. Everybody is masking to that. The degrees is just a method of approximating when you can see the stars. What everybody always used to do, they did not use fixed minutes, they did not use maniot, they did not use any of these things. They looked at the sky to see when you could see 3 stars. This was even until Dorot Aharonim Mamash. It was not just in the times of Rishonim. They say that many Eiduyot from the Chofetz Chaim in the yeshiva in Radin, he would give a long talk at Seudah Shlishit, and he would ask someone to go outside and look for stars. This is what everybody always used to do, is look at the stars. So of course they did not use Ma'alot, they did not use any of these other things. And this maniot is completely counterfactual, like Rabbi Sultan said, that actually the shortest time between sunset and Seit HaKochavim is in the spring and fall. And it gets a little longer in the winter, and it gets much longer in the summer. So according, if you go by Shautz Maniot, so the distance between sunset and Seit HaKochavim is shorter in the winter, and medium in the spring and fall, and then longest in the summer. So it just completely goes against reality, and all these things are huge chidushim to go by. It's because now we have clocks. Yes, you're right. The Uriah mentions they had rudimentary devices for measuring time. They had sundials. They had sand hourglasses. They had things like this, but this was not an everyday, day-to-day occurrence. The Uriah even says, I think he says, I have this hourglass, but I'm not even going to bother to use it. They didn't think the same way about time. They just didn't think the same way, though. It's very pashut and simple, that at every place and every time, even in Eretz Yisrael, they did not use the mill. This was given, maybe you could argue that it's given just if it was a cloudy day and they couldn't see stars, they could have some sort of approximation, something like that. But and it says in the Gemara also in Masechet Brachot, when it's talking about people who davened too early on Motzei Shabbat, that it was a rainstorm or something. It was very cloudy and very dark. They thought it was Seit HaKochavim. It wasn't Seit HaKochavim yet. So why didn't they use the clock? Well, of course, they didn't have clocks. They didn't use a mill. They didn't use anything. It got dark, so they davened. Okay, they made a mistake in that time. But the idea that someone could end Shabbat, especially in the spring and in the winter and in the fall, based on Shod Zmaniot in the U.S., even in Eretz Yisrael, I think is it's terrifying.
Okay. So return to that question just to add my own part. If I'm going to go so far as to say when it's counterfactual in Oslo and St. Petersburg, where Jews were, that you can still do 13 and a half minutes, whatever, maybe add a few minutes, 20 minutes, when it still looks to be light outside, I'm really arguing that Chazal don't care 100% about stars. That's a good siman, but that's not the real. That's just the siman, the outside what it looks like. The real thing is a certain approximation of Laila that Chazal, it's a metaphysical thing. You can't measure 100% with stars. If that's true, then I can go with the middle, even anywhere more. Similar to many, whatever. The cliche name of Vashel is not a science. The cliche is not very hot. It is very hot, and it could be very hot for very long. Doesn't matter. Cliche name of Vashel is a rule. Same thing I'm trying to argue over here.
And the kazayit is the size of an ostrich egg, and the Torah when one makes arguments like this, that makes the Torah not real. Klisheni is a specific halachic category that we know that there is a definition of certain things by Melechet Shabbat. Here we know this is something that's an everyday occurrence. It goes by the stars. The kazayit is an olive. Period.
Why do we care about 3 stars? Where it says in the Torah? It doesn't even say stars in the Torah.
It says in the
Tanakh.
Right?
Yes.
Sefer Ezra talks about Me'alot HaShachar at Seit HaKochavim. Kochavim, it goes. It's 2 Kochavim besides the first one, which doesn't count.
Okay, so you see stars. Some stars don't count. So maybe
the big ones. The Gemara says explicitly that it's the big stars don't count. It's the medium stars, and then we're not. That's another thing, which is that Chacham Ovadia, when he says you can go by the mill, so he completely ignores the Shulchan Aruch. He loves Maran. All of a sudden now he ignores Maran. Maran says that for the end of Shabbat you need 3 kochavim ketanim ritzufim. He said because of our nervousness about Tosefet Shabbat, whatever, that we need 3 medium stars isn't good enough. Me'ikar adin tzedek kochavim is when you see 3 medium-sized stars wherever in the sky. It doesn't matter. So he says to end Shabbat you need 3 small stars close together in the sky, in order for it just to be extra short and for the Tosefet Shabbat. So that obviously is longer than 3/4 of the mill. Even if you argue that 3/4 of the mill is koveya somehow, that's for kochavim beinonim, kochavim ketanim resufim is longer. So he says, oh, we don't need that anymore because now we have my calculations. I don't think that's correct. I don't think we go look at the sky and we have to be sure based on the stars what the end of Shabbat is.
I agree what you said that it's a finish, whatever, it's a divergence from simple Pirush to say we don't go by the stars. But just like Sturmbach has something he writes about Rabbeinu Tam, it doesn't seem to correspond to reality. So maybe Laila is just a definition the Chazal had a Masorah on, not based on what we see with our eyes. I don't know if it's the story last time. Yisrael Meltzer walking with Cheskel Abramsky wasn't keeping Rabbeinu Tam, and he told Yisrael Zalman, why do you keep Rabbeinu Tam in Israel? You see the stars are out. So he said, when was the last time you were posek based on your eyes? So Yisrael Zalman, obviously, Yisrael Zalman was also like a Talmud within Brisk. He knew Chaim. So he didn't posek based on his eyes. We have a Masorah how to define things. We have a Masorah what it means night. It doesn't matter. So it looks like Torah eyes otherwise, but it looks like a lot of things look like Torah eyes otherwise. So ignore it.
Well, the Masorah on what a night is exactly what it says in the Gemara. 3 stars. That's it. That's the Masorah.
The difference between
that was
night
the
and day
minhag.
is light.
And that was the minhag in all of Klal Yisrael until very recently.
So that I don't know if it's true.
I'll read that book.
So I have the homework to get to. I have the minhag, many that followed the Goni. But that was 3 stars. And that means 13 and a half minutes. And, or whatever, 15 minutes. Something like that. So I'm not surprised the minhag was like that, but that's not necessarily because of the stars. It's just because of the Masorah, we follow the mill. And I don't want to say there's a contradiction between 2 places in Gemara and Shulchan Aruch. He really holds what the mill says, like it has in the first one place he quotes Rabbeinu Tam. So it means throughout. He agrees. That approach. He didn't write it down because it was obvious.
Okay, so Rabbi Sultan is opening up the next topic, which is the conventional wisdom nowadays in Zmanim, is that there are 2 shitot min hakatzel hakatzel regarding when Bein Hashmashot is, when nightfall is. One is the shita of the Agonim, that Bein Hashmashot starts at what we call sunset, regular sunset, the sun goes below the horizon, and ends 13 and a half mil later. And then there's Rabbeinu Tam, which is that Bein Hashmashot starts, again we're using approximate, different shitot about the middle, but just convenient numbers, 58 and a half minutes after sunset, when in most places in the world it's already completely dark, and then ends at 72 minutes after sunset. So that's the conventional wisdom in Zmanim today. However, I find that this idea very, very, very difficult because there's no mention before relatively recently that there's any machaloket regarding the Geonim Rabbeinu Tam. In fact, the Rishonim, when they quote the Geonim regarding what they hold about the Zmanim, they say they agree with Rabbeinu Tam. That's the Rashba writes like that. There's no mention ever that Rabbeinu Tam in any Rishon until the Minchag not Rishon. There's no mention at all. There's no mention that Rabbeinu Tam, there's any problem with the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam from the Metziut. And there is no mention at all that the Rabbeinu Tam, when he was Mechadesh this thing, so that he went against the Minhag, or that it changed the Minhag in any way. And then, when later on, when you find Acharonim rediscovering the Shita of Rabbeinu Tam, or they knew about it, but they wanted to put it into practice, it's always that they argue with the Minhag. They say, everybody's not doing this, but Rabbeinu Tam says it, and all the Rishonim all like this, so we have to start doing it, we have to be Mahamer like this. Nowhere ever does it say that this was the minhag in any community to keep Shabbat until 72 minutes after sunset, and certainly not to begin Shabbat 58 and a half minutes after sunset when it's already dark. So again, working with this idea that people were not so medagdek regarding clocks and things like that. Also, how would they have figured it out? Again, there were no clocks. Say, I'll keep Shabbat until 72 minutes after sunset. What do you mean? I don't have a watch. How am I going to know what that is? I don't know what that is. So certainly Bein Hashmashot, when it starts 58 and a half minutes, what astronomical thing does that correspond to? The only way to figure it out is to look at the clock. And it's when the sun is already completely dark. So I think, yeah, the minhag in every single Jewish community ever was always that 3 stars is Tzeit HaKochavim, period. And they were different minhagim regarding the beginning of Bein Hashmashot. And in some communities they were very makbid that it starts at sunset, and some communities a little bit after. But when you hear people say that in the old country in Europe, so the minhag was like Rabbeinu Tam, and you think that means that they started Shabbat an hour after sunset, that is completely wrong. Nobody ever did that. And they maybe started a little bit after sunset when it was still a little light, and they consider, since it was such a big distance between that time and when Tzeit HaKochavim was, because the distance is longer in Europe, so they started, they didn't feel they had to start immediately at sunset, they started a little bit after. But to start so far when it's already dark, nobody ever did, and that's people have this in their imagination, and it's incorrect. And I think that basically Rabbeinu Tam, again, perhaps he was led astray by the fact that in Europe there's a much longer distance than it says in the Gemara, perhaps. But did he measure it exactly? Did he mean it that no matter what, even if it's completely dark, it's not Tzeit HaKochavim until 72 minutes after sunset? I don't think so. I think that the minhag was always like what I said, and all these things that people are makbid, introducing this idea you have to keep Shabbat until 72 minutes or 90 minutes in Zmaniot or in Ma'alot or whatever. This was all recent chidushim, and it's against the Mesorah of Klal Yisrael.
I have to formulate some of my disagreements very often here. For the first part, in terms of Rabbeinu Tam versus the Gonim, I strongly disagree. I think that they really, really disagree in many ways. My proofs are not from the 1500s. I think before that, I already noticed there were differences. A hint, this is a tiny hint, is the Rashba asks not from the Tziyut, but he asks something from the Gemara, Yerushalmi, on Rabbeinu Tam. He leaves it to Sarach Iyun, the way the Maggid Mishnah quotes it. But he doesn't seem to disagree in practice. And so, yes, we have 24, many Rishonim that all agree. Both the Chachmei Ashkenaz and Sfar, they agree with Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, Rabbeinu Tam. We have the we have the Hagomaimoni, the Mordechai, many, the Ramban, Rashba, Rizbah, Mukhi Yosef, maybe Rabbeinu Yonah. Ibn Ezra also sounds like it. He writes it's 80 minutes from Shkia until Tzeit HaKochavim, and then Azra Cholo Kohanim Truma. Now, whatever. That is in Parsha Bo. It does sound like Ibn Ezra lived in Spain, but he moved to a lot of places. In Italy, he went to a lot of places in the world. Anyway, Rav Yosef Karo held like it. So he lived in Israel. So to me, it's hard to believe that he didn't know about the Mitzvah. Okay, but now, is there a machloket? I believe firmly there is a machloket. Why do I think so? A second proof is the Sefer Me'orot. Rav Asher Meili, he was in Provence, student of the Hashlama, and a contemporary, the Hashlama is contemporary of the Meiri. He wrote a lot about the Rambam. And he writes a lot, the Hashlama writes a lot about what the Bali Tosfot write in 1300 in Provence. He writes Rabbeinu Tam, he quotes the Hashlama. Hashlama only says Rabbeinu Tam. Sefer Hashlama is posted like Rabbeinu Tam. Has the question, the Gemara Pesachim says 4 mil, Gemara Shabbat says 3/4 mil, so it's the end. And then he writes, Haram Gon, not Ram Zal, the Rambam. The Rambam doesn't write about any of these simanim of 4 mil. He doesn't write, he's not maskir for 4 mil. Sounds like he disagrees. And then he writes the same thing sounds like in the Rif. Rif left out the whole Gemara Pesachim. Of course, the Gemara Shabbat. So I think there's already a strong hint over there, as well as I think there are a few other pieces of evidence. There's tshuva from the Talmud of Rabbi Nissim Gaon, that's in Zman B'Halacha on the back, or whatever. He quotes it, 1300s, Kairouan, Genizah tshuva, that also says, when he's discussing the Brachot, that his Zman Aroch will be like an hour or less, that all the light comes out of the sky. But he says, the Tzeit HaKochavim is much before all the sun comes out, all the light goes out of the sky. It's Zman Katzar. He doesn't say how long it is. It's Zman Katzar. Certainly not Zman Aroch. It's certainly much less than an hour. So I don't think for sure he could have held Rabbeinu Tam. And he was in the same. That's and there are more proofs along these lines where I see a certain group of Rishonim that seem not to agree with Rabbeinu Tam. Rabbeinu Tam was describing what we're seeing in 72 minutes or whatever it is, a little bit later, at sunset. Shkira Haman till 4 mil later. So I think for sure there's going to be a machloket on that. And so we're troubled. Again, the minhag was not like Rabbeinu Tam. Okay, but it's like many things in the world that the minhag was not following the most poskim. So you have a choice over there. You follow the poskim, you follow the minhag. The Svardi psak was Yikov Adin Tahar. We don't care the minhag. The halacha says we do what the halacha says. That's where Shmuel and Yado in 1600s in Aram Sova made a cherem that they should keep it. The Kimo Kiblu HaYehudim, that the Jews in Syria accepted to follow Rabbeinu Tam. Or Chaim Abulafia, similar time in Turkey, in Istanbul, to follow Rabbeinu Tam. Or there was a Rabbi Yehuda Chutzin who went to Baghdad, 1700s. Also said everybody should follow Rabbeinu Tam. Chaim Palaji tried getting everybody. He said that his kids didn't even listen to him. Okay, but you see, the starting poskim said we should follow Rabbeinu Tam. So Hamavadia said it. So it's true. It's against the minhag. So what is against the minhag? Halacha is halacha. The minhag is otherwise.
Was the halacha like Rabbeinu Tam?
I think the halacha is like, I think at least the chumrah. Hamavadia changed his mind, so I'm going with the later version. It's only chumrah. But in his first edition, he held it was absolutely halacha. But fine, even if
Who's first edition?
in Chelik Bet, he writes that the Karadin is something to the chumrah. You have to follow Rabbeinu Tam. Chelik Zion, he accepts the minhag and he says the Karadin is not Rabbeinu Tam. So fine, you're right. According to Shulchan Aruch, in my vision, there's a machloket. We follow. Shulchan Aruch follow Rabbeinu Tam. I think at least the chumrah. It's a good chumrah to follow Rabbeinu Tam.
You wouldn't be allowed to follow Rabbeinu Tam.
Yeah, I think you can follow Rabbeinu Tam like that. It's a big sniff. 30 Rishonim held like how could I not include? Maybe Rav Haigon held like it. But forget Rav Haigon. I know that Rabbeinu Tam and the Avan and many Rishonim held like Rabbeinu Tam. Why would I not use them as a sniff lakel? So that's Hamavadia does that, and to me that's not so surprising. To praying mincha, whatever. I'll get a hefsek tara, whatever. Certain deraita things after shkira chama, you can use a sveika, use something a little bit. I don't think that's surprising. Reb Mazuz would not allow that. Hamavadia said no problem.
Yeah, I also don't. I don't think it's what Rabbeinu Tam meant, so I will not. I personally would not use Rabbeinu Tam as a sniff at all. That once it's dark and you see 3 stars, the idea that it's still Yom, I would not use as a sniff for any Shum Davar Shevar Olam. Personally.
What does Rabbeinu Tam mean, though? It doesn't he like he's not agreeing with you either?
Well, he doesn't say that because they didn't talk about the
No,
Gillim.
you're correct. But what does he mean?
So again, I agree. I will be modeh to Rabbi Sultan that some of the lashonot are a bit tahuk to understand what he's talking about. That I agree, but they're the hukim either way, and I prefer to be sovel the hukim my way than Rabbi Sultan's way. The question is, when he talks about two shki'ot, or the process of shki'ah, the tahilat shki'ah and the sot shki'ah, so the conventional understanding is that the tahilat shki'ah, according to Rabbeinu Tam, is sunset, and then the sot shki'ah is 58.5 minutes later. But there is a possible understanding that the timing is off. In other words, Tzeit HaKochim and Tzeit HaKochim, however long after sunset, and then the Tehilat Shki'ah, because he wasn't talking about what we have. We're so have such a straight, clear-cut sign for Shki'ah nowadays that it's the sun going below the horizon. So it was talking about this thing about that Rakia is a dome over the sky, and it's an actual physical thing. So when does the sun start going into the Rakia? So it's many Rishonim sound like this almost explicitly. Maybe some don't talk about it, so Rabbi Sultan won't accept it. But that you go backwards. In other words, you figure out first when Tzeit HaKochim is, and then Sof Shki'ah is 3/4 of a mil before that, and then Tehilat Shki'ah is just 4 mil before Tzeit HaKochim. So again, the Rabbeinu Tam fully understand all the ramifications with all the different locations and the different rates that the sun sets and night falls. I don't know, but it could have held that the Tehilat Shki'ah was a few minutes before sunset. And it sounds like that the Meiri, the Tosafot HaRosh say it's when the sun's light starts getting dim, or when most people can no longer see the sun because it's way down in the sky. So it's not necessarily Shkia. It could be a few minutes before, and that works very well because the Ramban he accepts Rabbeinu Tam. And why does he accept Rabbeinu Tam? Why does he love Rabbeinu Tam? So he says the Ramban says I cannot figure out when you can start accepting Tosefet Shabbat. The Ramban says that, again, not everybody agrees with this, but the Ramban says that the time that you can start accepting Tosefet Shabbat has to correspond with some astronomical phenomenon. If the sun is completely shining and it's really bright in daylight, so it's not shayach to accept Tosefet Shabbat. So he says, and I never understood this until I found Rabbeinu Tam. That he says there's something called Tehilat Shki'ah, where you see it's already starting to get a little dark even though it's daytime, and that's when you can start accepting Tosefet Shabbat. Also, Maran in the Shulchan Aruch, he only brings this idea of 4 mil in Siman Rish Samach Aleph, where he talks about the beginning of Shabbat, saying when you can start accepting Tosefet Shabbat. He doesn't mention this idea of 4 mil regarding Zman Kriyat Shema Shel Arvit or when Shabbat ends or any other thing. So you can be medayek from this. Rabbi Sultan will say, it's understood because you quoted in one place, you have to apply it to all the other places. Not so much, especially in the Ramban, that the Ksida Rabbeinu Tam is only relevant for the beginning of Shabbat when you can start accepting Tosefet Shabbat, but it was not meant to present a later Tzeit HaKochavim, because he doesn't mention that at all. He says, he doesn't say, but everybody's doing something else, and now Rabbeinu Tam says, you really have to keep Tzeit HaKochavim later. No, he says only for the beginning. The Hidush was the Hilat Shki'ah, not a different man for Tzeit HaKochavim.
So, how many minutes, bottom line, after sunset the Shabbat ends?
According to me, like the Shulchan Aruch says, 3 kochavim ketanim retzufim, which is at about 8.5 degrees, which in New York is between 40 and 50 minutes after sunset. You want to add a little more. You want to keep 72 minutes as a complete chumrah, just because in some places that's where they mention that there's such as man of tzeit kochavim. Okay, but on the other hand, the Chazon Ish said that you bedavka should not keep what was quote unquote Rabbeinu Tam of 72 minutes or whatever after sunset, because if you keep it lechumrah, you'll be tempted to think it's a real shita, and therefore when you have something where that requires a kula, so you might be tempted to be mitzaref what you imagine the shita of Rabbeinu Tam is, even though it's wrong and it's not true. So you bedavka should not be machmir like Rabbeinu Tam. So most people don't something like that. They say you could be, but again, for ta'anit Rabbanan, you could be making a little more. But chas v'shalom to end Shabbat in America before 40-50 minutes after sunset.
I would say I wouldn't say we should follow 13 minutes Zmaniyot, not at all for Shabbat. We have to follow what we see in terms of ma'alot degrees. What Ravin said is, as we see the stars do correspond to ma'alot. I would use 13.5 minutes in Israel, applying that to degrees. So 20 minutes on like an equinox day, going to be machmir 25 minutes. That's what the Ikar did for ending Shabbat. Now the Minhag, I'm not going to break the Minhag. The Minhag is 30, it used to be in 35, I heard, maybe 40. Or each and every place, our Pashte, we wouldn't break the Minhag. The Minhag is to add minutes, of course, Tosefet Shabbat, we should add time. But I think Ikar did is 20, 25. Now, why don't we see stars then? I think it's just we're not experts. We're not places where there's no light pollution. If you be in the
What about
desert...
Ketamim Tzufim?
So that, you're right. Then we have to add on 2 minutes for that. We have to add something. That's what Chumavadi did. In Israel, they don't do, in the Luach or Yisrael Yosef, to breaking Shabbat is 20 minutes. Why? Because they want to use the most Machmir mill, 18 minutes out of 24 minutes, and they had 2 more minutes for Tosefet Shabbat. So fine, we want to do 20 minutes even in Israel and bring that in, and then apply that over here, it comes out like 30 minutes. Okay, but I would say, if someone does 30 minutes over here, I think that's the halacha. Now, in terms of minhag, I wouldn't go less than what the community, what the local rabbis say to do. That's why I think meaning minhag is also important. We don't go less than that. But I think absolutely Rabbeinu Tam and Gonim do disagree. And I can't understand any other opinion in Rabbeinu Tam. The word shkiya means like sinking, like salalu, like the Targum is ishtaku. So salalu is to sink. It's like the Ramban mentions Galgal Chama. There's an item that's coming down, sinking into something else. I don't think it could be getting darker around sunset. I think it has to be astronomical. Shkia, that's what it has to be. So Rabbeinu Tam must have been talking about that. But I think we could follow 30 minutes for sure. But the minhag, we should do whatever the minhag is to add to 35, 40, we should follow 45, whatever the minhag is each place. But I think it's really just a big chumrah to say 40 and 50, less than 40, 50. I think is a big chumrah. And the people, Rabbi Solovsky in Morosh HaKol was on the mountain able to see the stars in 32 minutes. I think you could see stars in America much before 40 minutes. If you're in no light pollution, you know what you're looking for. I think even that was probably the chumrah. You probably could see it after 25 minutes. They have the edut that somebody saw in Israel after 15 minutes in the desert of Negev, whatever. I don't think that's impossible. Going 18-minute meal to me is anyway strange. Doing 16 3/4 minutes, which is a 22.5-minute meal, saying that in Eretz Israel, applying that to America, comes at 23 minutes or something over here. I think that makes perfect sense. And I think we look hard and long, I think we'd see the stars.
And maybe, but I think that rushing to try to go at the exact Zman and figuring out exactly when you could see stars, we didn't even get to Hitzifah Yom Vishvat Tachton. That's all what that means. Maybe you need that before you look for stars. A lot of so we have to look to the Masorah, which is approximately 8.5 degrees. Rabbi Tukachinsky formulated it that way, but that's what was done in Europe also, and in many. He just came out with a second volume where he specifically focused on the Sephardic countries. And more or less what was done. And we should go like the tradition. We should go like there's some. I think it's even in the Rishonim that it says that you should wait to end Shabbat. This is the Gemara. It sounds like this. The extra time. You should wait until it's Laila Heitev, not just when you can see the three stars, but you go outside. What I interpret this to mean is you go outside, and in your glancing around, you don't see any light, which is also around 8.5, 9, 10 maybe degrees. You should go until that time. So I don't see the rush. And again, Ketanim Ritzufim, you have Ketanim Ritzufim, you for sure cannot see before approximately 8.5 degrees. So again, that's the accepted thing nowadays, and I'm Matzdik the Minhag. I think that any efforts to give an earlier Zman for ending Shabbat are not correct, as well as any that seek to give a later Zman and push it on people. Again, you can be Machmir, you can add extra time to Shabbat, assuming you're not going to be tempted to go in the other direction. Yeah.
Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, you had the opposite regarding praying Mincha. That the minhag always was, again, people talk about praying Mincha after Shkiah, which in some communities they did. But again, praying so late. So the Satmar Eruv did the opposite. When he came to America, everybody thinks that in Europe they daven mincha when it was dark. It's not true. They did not daven mincha when it was dark. A little after Shkiah, yes. 10, 20 minutes, depending on what place in Europe they did. But the Satmar Eruv was so strong that he insisted that everybody had to keep 72 minutes. That's the Ikar Adin, that's Rabbeinu Tam, that's the Shulchan Aruch, that's what he held. It's not what I hold. That he said, so he was mitaken that the Hasidim should start davening mincha until 72 minutes to be mechazek. That's really the halacha. That they cannot be making on that at all at the end of Shabbat. So that was a huge avla in my opinion, and it's not correct. It's you have to go based on astronomical reality and something that makes sense.
I don't agree with the 40, 50 minutes. I think all those are, that's not the Chumrah is not the 72 minutes. The Chumrah is the 40, 50 minutes. 72 minutes has a good basis. So I think on Yom Kippur when we say Mashe Tarti Asarti, adding more Chumrah on what Hashem said. They're adding 50, 40, 50 minutes is the Chumrah.
Have the ta'ana that they added Ketanim Uretzufim.
That was so Tosefet Shabbat for individuals or for communities that they wanted to do it, but to say that everybody has to, I don't think that's.
So the Shulchan Aruch, everybody has to do it.
No, that's from Rabbi. That's just saying. You say something in Libo, Tosefet Shabbat. But how much is Tosefet Shabbat? The Rishonim say it's
He said
2 minutes.
So receive it raised study gimel. Tzarich li zaher shelo להתחיל להבין, I think was there. I think until עד שיראו שלא זק כוכבים קטנים ורצופים.
Good, but that only adds a few minutes. I'm not saying to ignore the Shulchan Aruch. I'm just saying it's bottom line. It's not so many minutes. 40, 50 minutes. The Kaf Chaim writes in Yerushalayim 100 years ago they had 40 minutes. Chama said that based on nothing. There's 13 minutes and there's 72 minutes. So you want to do 40 minutes? They just out of thin air. So that's why I'm arguing with that.
My derech, again, maybe because I'm Ashkenazi, and that's what the Ashkenazi don't like, is the Masdik the Minhag. Again, not always, but just because you came and you learned the Sugya and you decided that this shita between 13 and a half minutes and 72 minutes makes no sense and it doesn't exist and you can't justify it even though that's what everybody was doing. So that rubs me very much the wrong way, and I think that the minhag should be continued and adhered to, assuming that it's a real minhag. There are a lot of, new chumrot that were imposed recently by various poskim that I disagree with, but
But
not one of them.
I think it's possible for minhagim to be mistaken. Like the Chatam Sofer doing malacha a few minutes after sunset, up to like 8-9 minutes, but making finishing Shabbat 45 minutes after Shkia. I think that's.
But he held that was Rabbeinu Tam.
Yes, but I think that's Ochez Shechem L'Shteich. I think that's.
But he held that was Rabbeinu
I think
Tam.
that's a mistake for sure, one way or the other.
Because Tzeit Kochavim, according to him, is whatever, it's about 7 degrees, according to the Chatam Sofer, in the Tshuva, and you go backwards. So Ben Hashmashot is 15 minutes before that, and it was 72 minutes before his man is the Techilat Shkia. That was the minhag in Europe. That's what everybody did. And it makes sense to a certain extent. It's still light out. Even though the sun has set, it's still completely light out, so it's not Laila. We know that with the Shita of Rabbi Yossi in the Gemara, which is the real Ikar, is the Shita of Rabbi Yossi. That while it's still light out, it's before it's at the Gochavim it's Yom. So that I can live with. Again, I don't get me wrong. I think everybody should begin Shabbat l'Shkia. That's the accepted minhag nowadays. That also makes very good sense, and there is a good basis for that with regular sunset. Obviously, a little bit more because of the Sefer Shabbat a little bit earlier. I'm not going to be makel with that for Shabbat at least, and maybe for certain other things. Like I'll give a few minutes after, but not that many. But it has to make sense. Saying Tzeit Kochavim is 72 minutes after sunset all around the world, in all places, at all times, is nonsense. To put it, it makes no sense.
Okay, so last question, Rabbi, you already addressed this, but can you ever pray mincha or allow a sek tahara after sunset?
So I think that there's a good reason to allow it based on Sfeikot. Ben Hashmashot is anyway Safek. The Gemara says we're machmir on all sides. Chamavad has, you can use Sfeikat sometimes. So to use for mincha, anyway, he says we have the Safek that many Rishonim held you can pray mincha until nighttime, until Seder Kochavim. So there, Rabbeinu Yonah and Maran Shulchan Aruch, you could do, so therefore, L'chachila, he allows mincha until 13 and a half minutes after Shkia. So that is not the minhag that, in my opinion, even amongst Sfaradim, I think the best minhag is that they pray a little before Shkia, but Chamavadia really allowed that. So that's mincha, and the same thing with Hefsek Tara, Chamavadia allows it, Ramosha allowed it 9 minutes, Chamavadia allows 13 and a half minutes. I think that is correct. Using it as suffix, Hefsek Tara, you use other steikot, and Zechron Yosef, that's not the right, a few other reasons why Hefsek Tara you can get around in some ways. Not l'chachil, but b'diavad, or l'ikar adin, it's a safek. Not only because of Rabbeinu Tam, a combination of a lot of things. Rabbeinu Tam is one safek, plus the Gonim might hold it as day. All of those together with some or another in each and every case. I think you can make sfeikot, smifim.
So again, there's a lot. Again, we don't have the end of the word on this matter. The last word on this matter. There's still research to be done. There's still what to understand. A lot of things that are not clear. So I think in general we should be machmir again before Shkia, so for at least to begin Tefillah Mincha before Shkia. But to begin before Shkia and continue during Ben Hashmatzot is, in my opinion, that's fine. Maybe Rabbi Sultan disagrees. But I think that is proper to be machmir. But if you didn't have Mincha, obviously you have a few minutes and after Shkia to do it. I have Siktar also. One should be very makpid lechatchila to finish before Shkia. But if there's some sort of shat adchak or something, so then again I would agree with that would be a few minutes, but not for the same reasoning necessarily as Rabbi Sultan. Again, we have to be berevach. We don't know for sure. We have to go by the minhag. We have to go by what makes sense. We have to give ourselves leeway halachically, not just be so set in our ways and so be machlit and chotech b'din.
Anybody, any questions or clarify any other points? Any last thoughts?
You should get the last word here.
No, I just want to clarify what I mentioned. That I think it makes sense to follow Chamavadia's opinions. I was trying to explain them as a Chumrah Rabbeinu Tam, but not to say that's the Ikar Adin. I think Ikar Adin is the Gonim, and to do Zmaniot Chamavadia held. I think there's Yesham al Smoch to follow Zmaniot, but it makes more sense Ma'alot. So for the right is really Tal Ma'alot, like Cham David. Yosef comes out, his conclusion, I think it makes more sense. But some things adding on more minutes, maybe it's the minhag, and I wouldn't break the minhag, but I think that's not the ikar adin. That's my opinions on these matters, based on assuming there's machloket Rabbeinu Tam, the Gonim, and it's a big question. So I have to follow the Gonim just because that's what the later poskim came out, or maybe it's the Gonim, maybe it's the Rif, maybe it's the Rambam, but something to write to the Chumrah. Rabbeinu Tam's a good Chumrah. Maybe it could be used even as a Kuba. That's my opinion summarized on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Chazak Baruch.
Chazak Baruch.